concerning that plane that was diverted and the journalist arrested as it flew over Belarusian airspace. Leaders from around the world have condemned the actions. This was an opposition journalist who was taken from the flight that was originally heading to Lithuania but diverted to the country so he could be arrested effectively. Roman Protasevich was on that Ryanair flight from Athens, which was rerouted to Minsk on Sunday. A video was released last night which seems to show him confessing to crimes he has been charged with by prosecutors in Belarus. His dad, Dmitry Protasevich, believes he was told what to say and was recorded under duress.
I think he was forced. It's not his words. It's not his intonation. He appears very reserved, and you can see he's nervous. It's very likely that his nose is broken because the shape of it is changed, and my son can't admit to creating mass disorder because he didn't do any such thing.
Well, yesterday, the Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab told the Commons that the grounding of the flight had been a reckless and dangerous breach of international law.
The UK calls for his immediate release and the release of all other political prisoners in Belarus. We are urgently seeking full details of precisely what took place in relation to flight FR 4978, but the scenario as reported is a shocking assault on civil aviation and an assault on international law.
Speak to our correspondent Nick Beak in Brussels. Nick, I know the BBC isn't showing or playing audio from the video of Roman Protasevich in prison because it's believed it was obtained under duress, but can you tell us what it shows?
Morning, Rachel. Yeah, it emerged last night, this video, and he's seen to speak directly to the camera. He says he's being treated well in prison. He apparently confesses to provoking mass unrest in Belarus, and, that happens to be one of the crimes he'd been charged with by the Belarusian state. Obviously, concerns that this statement was made under duress. We heard from his dad there. Certainly, if you look at the video, Mr. Protasevich's forehead, it looks bruised. Also, colleagues he used to work with have said that they believe he's been beaten. And his dad had, said yesterday during the day to the BBC he feared his son would be tortured. And, said this shouldn't be happening in the 21st century in the heart of Europe. And overnight, US President Biden's become the latest world leader to condemn the actions of Belarus, saying this is outrageous, a shameful assault on both political dissent and the freedom of the press. And President Biden was speaking as the EU leaders were agreeing late last night what to do in terms of sanctions on Belarus.
Yeah, but it is happening there in Europe. And what about the EU? How have EU leaders responded? Is there anything they can do particularly?
Well, I think listening to them late last night or in the early hours of this morning when they gave a press conference, or certainly Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, she's saying that EU leaders are acting quickly and they're taking really tough action because I think they'd set themselves a pretty high bar because, some of the language they were using, Rachel, talking about hijacking, state-sponsored terrorism, aviation piracy. And so what we've seen is some specific action in retaliation on aviation. So, they've decided to ban Belarusian airlines from entering European airspace. EU leaders have told EU airlines not to fly over Belarus, so it works both ways. And they've also promised further economic sanctions. We know that 80 individuals are already facing a travel ban or asset freezes that Brussels has got together. But in terms of, the detail and the time frame of these extra sanctions, we haven't got those yet.
OK, thank you. We'll wait to see then. Nick Beak, our correspondent in Brussels.
Let's speak to Elena Korosteleva, a professor of international politics at the University of Kent. Good morning.
Hello, good morning.
Are you surprised at this whole run of events from what the boss of Ryanair, Michael O'Leary, has described as a state-sponsored hijacking to the appearance of Mr. Protasevich on camera, perhaps having been beaten up, and a confession inveigled out of him? How much of a surprise has it all been?
Well, there is a degree of surprise at the fact that Lukashenko actually now started acting internationally, meaning hijacking the European plane and diverting it to land with a force at Minsk airport. But on the other hand, there is no surprise there at all, judging by how he has acted since the disputed election in August 2020, when basically he held the whole country hostage. Now with nearly 35,000 people imprisoned, beaten, tortured. So there is no surprise here at all when it comes to freedom of press and barring journalists and torturing them, forcing them to make false statements.
Presumably he thinks he can do all this with impunity.
Well, this is where I think the gist of the problem lies, in the sense that given the fact that until now, really the international community has not really acted coherently, and although there have been three rounds of sanctions introduced, these sanctions are really rather light sanctions. And that gives really Lukashenko a feeling that he can go unpunished. And he actually, especially acting within his own country, because now, of course, the incident crossed the borders of Belarus. It has become an international precedent. And I hope this is now the higher moment when we can all act. And as Tom Tugendhat said on Sunday, if we don't act now, then we will fail to act.
Because Belarus ethnic Russian. What will the tenor of Mr. Lukashenko's conversations with Vladimir Putin have been over the last 24 hours?
Well, first of all, I don't think that Lukashenko would have acted alone here, in a sense that his actions, diverting an international plane, clearly would not be unsupported. And being emboldened by Putin's support, I guess this encouraged him to commit this act of terrorism. So I presume now they were discussing possibly the consequences and, of course, the new round of sanctions coming, which is very likely to affect not just Belarus, but also Russia, because Lukashenko's finances, they extend as far as Eurasia, Russia goes. So I guess, the talk was about potential consequences, and that Lukashenko is facing now.
Possibly with Vladimir Putin's support to bolster
Absolutely.
his position. So what about the election itself? The Lukashenko-controlled Central Election Commission confirmed this sixth term in office, 80% of the vote. He's won every single presidential election since 1994. How corrupt was it, and what has happened to most of the opposition, including the opposition candidate, who is a pretty impressive woman, Svetlana Tishanovskaya? So what has happened to her and her colleagues?
The August 2020 election was not unprecedented in that sense. The only perhaps honest election that took place in the country was back in 1994. Ever since, every single election was fraudulent. But this time, this scale was totally unprecedented in the sense that people knew they were coming out in droves in order to vote for Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. And suddenly, the day after, they realized that actually it is Lukashenko himself once again won 80% of the vote. So that caused massive outrage in the country. So people took it to the streets, and what we saw beginning from August 2020 is this massive demonstrations, massive protests across the country, not just capital, but even in sleepy towns of Belarus. People coming out in their hundreds of thousands to protest. And that's when Lukashenko unleashed absolute total brutality on his own people. Violence, torture, murder. Even concentration camps were set up in order to intern people there. And that's the first time in Eastern Europe since the Second World War. And of course, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, she's absolutely amazing in the sense that, coming from nowhere, and learning really fast, she has now become not just the symbol of free Belarus. She keeps advocating for Belarus internationally, globally.
We will talk again. Thank you very much indeed, Professor Elena Korosteleva. It's 7:49.
This is BBC Radio 5 Live. Listen live.